I thought maybe it was a delivery driver or a realtor finishing paperwork. But then I noticed the curtains inside were drawn, the smoke from the chimney, and a woman, maybe in her 50s, stepping out like she owned the place. "Can I help you?" she asked, crossing her arms. I said, "I think you're in my house." She laughed, actually laughed. "Your house? That's funny. I've lived here for 6 months." For a second, I thought I was being pranked. I even double-checked the address on the deed in my truck. Same one. Ridgepoint Lake, parcel 14B. The same cabin I'd bought at the county auction. When I came back to the porch, there was a man now, too thick beard, beer in hand, wearing work boots. He said, "We don't know what scam you're trying to pull, but you need to leave before I call the sheriff." I tried to stay calm, explained that I had paperwork, receipts, the full deed signed and stamped. But they didn't even look at it. The woman, Pamela, told me she'd been taking care of this place for months, paying utilities, mowing the lawn, keeping it from falling apart. She said she had squatter's rights. My heart dropped. I called the county clerk, then the auction office. Every department said the same thing: "You'll have to take it up with the sheriff." So I did. Sheriff Randall Tall, mustache, the kind of man who looks like he's never been told no in 20 years. I explained everything, handed him the deed, the proof of purchase, even my loan documents. He looked at them, sighed and said, "Well, looks like we've got a civil dispute here. Nothing I can do." I couldn't believe it. "Nothing you can do? They're living in my house." He shrugged. "You'll have to file for eviction through the courts. Could take a few months. Best not to make a scene." That's when I realized he knew them. Pamela waved at him like an old friend. Randall even tipped his hat. When I asked how they knew each other, he said, "Small town. Everyone knows everyone." He told me to leave before this gets ugly. That night, I sat in my truck outside that cabin until the sun went down, staring at the light in the window that should have been mine. I'd worked 30 years in infrastructure roads, dams, emergency response. I'd been shot at, burned, exhausted. But nothing in my life had ever made me feel smaller than watching someone else live in my home while the law told me to go away. Then one winter, everything changed. I still remember the call, her voice weak but steady. They found something in my lungs. Stage 3. It spread faster than either of us could keep up with. For a year and a half, I balanced hospital visits and night shifts, trying to be strong for both of us. That stuck with me. It was buried deep in the listings, a foreclosure property, unpaid taxes, auctioned by the county. The photos looked rough, overgrown weeds, roof sagging, dock half underwater. But the view was something else. Mist curling off the lake, sunlight hitting the water like a mirror. It looked peaceful, unspoiled. The county clerk told me it had been abandoned for years. The last owners walked away during a bankruptcy. The paperwork was messy but legitimate. I bid everything I had and won. When I signed those documents, it felt like the first time in years I could breathe again. I spent weeks planning what I'd do first: clean the place, fix the roof, repaint the dock, maybe even hang Helen's sketch of the cabin she used to draw. That's what made that day at the driveway so hard to swallow. It wasn't just a house. It was her. It was every dream we'd postponed for someday. And now, Pamela, a stranger with a smug grin and a sheriff on her side, was living inside it like she'd earned it. For days after that confrontation, I stayed at a cheap motel in town, calling every lawyer I could find. Most didn't even return my messages. One finally did, a younger guy named Reed from the next county over. He told me, "Squatters can't claim rights if you've got a clear deed, but local politics can make it messy." Messy was an understatement. Reed said Pamela had filed a claim of maintenance on the property, basically saying she'd been taking care of it and paying utilities. In some counties, that gives them temporary occupancy protection until the court sorts it out. How long does that take? I asked. Could be 6 weeks. Could be 6 months. I remember hanging up the phone and just staring at the motel ceiling. 6 months. For a place I'd already paid for. But what I didn't know then was that Pamela wasn't just a squatter. She was the HOA president for the surrounding community, and she'd been using her position to manipulate the very people meant to protect property owners like me. The kind of woman who played golf with the sheriff, attended every council meeting, and smiled for every photo in the town newsletter. That's when I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a setup. And if I wanted my home back, I'd have to beat her at her own game. By the end of that first week, I learned more about Pamela Hargrove than I ever wanted to. In Ridgepoint County, her name carried weight, the kind of weight that came with 30 years of smiling her way through small-town politics. She wasn't just the president of the local HOA, she was the HOA. Her family owned half the properties on the north side of the lake. Her husband used to run the building inspection department. Her brother-in-law, county zoning. Everyone in town called her Pom, like she was some friendly neighbor with a casserole dish. But anyone who'd lived under her HOA knew better. She was the kind of woman who didn't argue, she enforced. If your grass was an inch too long, you'd find a fine in your mailbox. Paint your shutters the wrong shade of beige. Expect a warning notice. Forget to pay dues once. She'd put a lion on your property before you even knew it. And now she was living in my cabin, claiming she was protecting it. I tried reasoning again, went to the HOA office on Main Street, a small white building that smelled like paper and perfume. Pamela sat behind a desk with her name on a gold plate, smiling like we were old friends. "Mr. Latham," she said, folding her hands, "you have to understand, when a property sits vacant for so long, the HOA steps in to maintain it. It's standard practice. I've been paying utilities, keeping the grounds tidy. You should be thanking me." "Thanking you?" I said. "For squatting?" Her smile didn't move, but her eyes went cold. "You can call it what you like. The community calls it stewardship." Then she slid a folder across the desk. Inside were a stack of invoices, landscaping, trash removal, pest control, all with her signature. "If you want the property released," she said, "you'll need to reimburse the HOA for these costs." $87,000. I laughed, thinking it was a joke, but she wasn't joking. She'd literally added the price I paid for the cabin to her expenses. I told her I'd see her in court. She leaned back and said, "You could, but I'd advise against it. Judges around here respect community involvement." Translation, she owned them too. When I left her office, 2 of the deputies were parked across the street. Same ones who'd been with Sheriff Randall the day he told me to leave. Watching me, smiling. That's when I knew I wasn't fighting one person. I was fighting a system that revolved around her. That night, I sat in the diner down by the highway, trying to figure out my next move. A waitress named Mel, probably in her 40s, came by and asked if I wanted coffee. She noticed the stack of papers on my table and said, "Let me guess, dealing with Pam?" "Yeah," I said. "You know her?" She laughed under her breath. "Everyone does. She runs this town like it's her private kingdom. Cross her once and she'll make sure your business license vanishes." She got my brother fined for parking his work truck in his own driveway. That's when she leaned in and whispered, "You're not the first person she's done this to." Her words hit me like a hammer. The deeper I went, the clearer it became Pamela wasn't maintaining properties. She was collecting them. "Might?" I asked. He nodded. "You're up against an entrenched network, the sheriff, the county clerk, maybe even the judge. They all owe her favors. We'll need more than proof. We'll need leverage." Leverage. That word stuck with me. If Pamela had spent her life using connections to build her empire, maybe it was time I built mine quietly, carefully, and in the one place she never thought I'd look, her own backyard. So I started talking to people, the kind of people she'd stepped on for years. Landscapers, renters, contractors, even a former HOA treasurer who'd been forced out. Each one had a story, a receipt, or a copy of a letter Pamela never thought anyone kept. Piece by piece, I started assembling a puzzle, a record of corruption so deep it could crack her entire foundation. And for the first time since that day in the driveway, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope.its funny how quickly fear can turn into focus once you've got nothing left to lose. For weeks, I'd been reacting, calling lawyers, begging county offices, trying to reason with people who'd already chosen a side. But one night, sitting in that motel parking lot with papers spread across my dashboard, I realized something. Pamela wasn't untouchable. She was just unopposed. People feared her because she controlled everything: the HOA board, the sheriff, the local paper. But power built on fear always has cracks. And I was done waiting for permission to take back what was mine. The next morning, I drove to the construction yard outside town where I used to subcontract storm cleanup years ago. I still knew a few of the old guys there, mostly veterans, retired workers, men who'd seen how small-town politics could ruin honest people. One of them, a wiry man named Dwayne, remembered me from the wildfire response days. "Garrett Latham," he said, shaking his head. "Didn't think I'd see you again. Heard you bought the old lake cabin." I nodded. "Bought it? Yeah. Now trying to get it back." He grinned like he already knew what I meant. "Pamela, right?" That name got a laugh from half the men in the yard. Turns out, she'd made plenty of enemies, especially among the contractors she underpaid for HOA work. Dwayne told me they still had copies of falsified invoices she'd filed for repairs that were never done. "You're telling me she billed homeowners for fake maintenance?" I asked. He shrugged. "Wouldn't surprise me." We called her Pam the Phantom Pair. Half her projects existed only on paper. That was my first lead, and it opened a floodgate. But evidence wasn't enough. I needed a way to make it public and undeniable. When I told him everything, he didn't hesitate. "If we can verify this, she's done," he said. "But we'll need a witness inside the HOA. Someone current." The HOA's newest secretary, a soft-spoken woman named Linda, reached out to me after hearing I was the guy Pamela threw out. She'd seen her doctoring meeting minutes and signing expense authorizations in members' names. She was scared, but she agreed to help. Together, we formed a quiet alliance, me gathering proof, Cole documenting every piece, and Linda leaking records from inside. Meanwhile, Pamela had no idea. She still strutted around town like Queen of the Lake, holding community cleanup days and posting photos of herself planting flowers in front of properties she didn't even own. I'd show up sometimes just to watch her reaction. The moment she saw me, her smile would tighten, a little flicker of fear behind the eyes. It was working. Reed, my attorney, warned me to stay cautious. "You're playing with fire," he said. "If she catches wind of this, she'll hit you with defamation before you can blink." I told him I wasn't defaming anyone I was documenting. Every receipt, every falsified payment, every HOA email she sent to herself pretending to be someone else. What Reed didn't know yet was that I had one last card to play, something Pamela could never anticipate. During my years in emergency infrastructure, I'd worked with state-level inspectors. I knew how to file official reports, the kind that triggered automatic audits when submitted under a verified ID. All I had to do was link her fraudulent maintenance work to county contracts, and the audit would go straight over her head to the state. So one night, In that same motel room that had become my war room, I filled out a formal infrastructure fraud inquiry with attached exhibits, invoices, HOA records, utility transfers. I didn't sign it with my name. I used my old inspector ID from my contract days. The system still recognized it. When I hit submit, it felt like lighting a fuse. 2 weeks later, a state compliance officer quietly visited the county office. No warning, no courtesy call. Just walked in, asked for Pamela's HOA documentation, and started making copies. The next morning, Pamela's face wasn't smiling anymore. She knew something was coming. She just didn't know from where. I sat across the lake that evening, watching her pacing the porch that used to be mine, phone pressed to her ear. The same woman who'd laughed in my face now looked cornered. For the first time in months, I slept without checking the clock. Because I knew the trap had finally started to turn. IT started with a knock. 3 sharp raps on the motel door just after dawn. When I opened it, 2 deputies were standing there, the same ones who'd smirked at me outside Pamela's office. "Garrett Latham?" one of them asked. "Yeah." "You're being served," he said, handing me a manila envelope. "Temporary restraining order. Filed by Pamela Hargrove." I stared at the papers. Restraining order? For what? The deputy added, "You're to have no contact with Mrs. Hargrove or approach her residence within 200 feet. Her residence. My cabin. I asked what grounds she had, and the deputy shrugged. Claims of harassment, trespassing, intimidation, and threats. I laughed out loud. She's the one living in my house. Take it up with the court, he said, walking off. I stood there in the parking lot, hands shaking, watching their cruiser pull away. She wasn't just fighting back, she was rewriting the story. By the time I got to the lawyer's office, Reed already knew. She's playing smart, he said, flipping through the papers. She's painting you as unstable. Says you've been stalking her, photographing her property, threatening messages. I cut him off. That's all false. He nodded. Of course it is. But it buys her time and sympathy. The court will delay your eviction filing until this restraining order is resolved. Pamela had found a way to freeze my case. Again. Within days, rumors spread through town. People whispered about the angry engineer harassing the beloved HOA president. Even Mel, the diner waitress, said customers had started avoiding me, afraid to be seen taking sides. And then the real blow came. A notice taped to my truck windshield: unpaid county fines, $3,400 for illegal waste dumping. So I switched tactics. I stopped talking. No emails, no calls, no public appearances. I wanted her to think she'd won, that I was retreating. In it, Pamela had asked Sheriff Randall to open an intimidation file against me, referring to me by name before the restraining order had even been filed. It was proof of collusion. Cole called me that night, voice shaking with excitement. "Garrett, this is it. We've got her coordinating with law enforcement for personal gain. That's abuse of power." He was right. But we needed one more thing, something undeniable, something the state investigators couldn't ignore or bury. That's when Linda told us about the HOA emergency fund. Every homeowner in Ridge Point Estates paid an annual $800 emergency maintenance fee. But according to the bank statements she'd accessed, not a single dollar of that fund had been used for repairs in over 3 years. Instead, those funds had been transferred directly into an account belonging to Hargrove Management, LLC, Pamela's private company. Cole's eyes lit up. Money trail. That's the nail in the coffin. I asked Linda if she could get us statements. She said she'd try. But Pamela must sense something was off. 2 days later, Linda texted me, "I think she's on to me." Someone went through my desk. Then silence. No calls. No messages. When I stopped by her office the next day, her nameplate was gone. Another secretary sat at her desk. "She doesn't work here anymore," the woman said. "Personal reasons." Pamela had flushed her out. That night, I sat by the lake, headlights off, watching the cabin glow from across the water. Pamela was hosting another community dinner. Laughter spilled across the porch, wine glasses clinking. She was untouchable again, or so she thought. Because what she didn't know was that Cole had already forwarded everything, every file, every photo, every bank record to the state's Department of Real Estate Fraud. And he'd scheduled a feature article titled "The Queen of Ridgepoint: How One HOA President Built an Empire on Deception." It was set to publish in 3 days. But Pamela wasn't going down quietly. The next morning, 2 black SUVs pulled into the motel lot. Sheriff Randall stepped out with a warrant in hand. "Garrett Latham," he said, "you're under arrest for obstruction of a county investigation and filing fraudulent documents with the state." I stared at him, stunned. "You've got to be kidding." But he wasn't smiling. Pamela had struck back harder than ever. And as they led me to the cruiser, all I could think was, she wasn't just trying to ruin me. She was trying to erase me.B. By the time the city crew arrived, Karen was already mid-speech. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown, she pointed dramatically toward the trench beside my driveway. "This man," she said, "is illegally digging into community lines. He's tampering with utilities. I demand you shut this down immediately." The 2 workers, both wearing high-vis vests, exchanged glances. One of them looked at me and then at the large blue and white truck parked by the curb. Its door clearly read Western Infrastructure Services Division of City Utilities. I stepped forward calmly, wiping the sweat from my brow. "Morning, fellas," I said. "Thanks for coming out so fast. I'm David, project lead for this section. You can confirm my clearance on file." Karen blinked. "Project lead? Don't you try to twist this. I've already called the HOA board." "Ma'am," one of the city workers interrupted gently, "your HOA doesn't have jurisdiction over municipal utility lines. This property is part of a public access easement. He's authorized." For the first time since she'd moved in, Karen went completely silent. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. What do you mean he's authorized?" she stammered. The second worker held up his tablet, scrolling through a list. "David, that's you, right? Senior Field Engineer for the Utility Division?" I nodded. "That's correct. Been with the department 22 years. We're replacing aging service connections, starting with my own lot to save the city an inspection trip." The clipboard in Karen's hand wavered. She took a step back, scanning my truck again as if seeing it for the first time. "You own the utility company?" she finally asked. "Not own, ma'am," I said with a faint grin. "I just run this district for the city. But yes, those lines you wanted to cut off, they're under my department's care." A small crowd had gathered by then, neighbors curious about the commotion. One of them, old Mr. Benson, from across the cul-de-sac, chuckled and said, "Guess the power's in good hands after all." Even the city crew couldn't help but smile. Karen, red-faced and speechless, muttered something about miscommunication before retreating up her driveway. Her precious clipboard drooped at her side like a defeated flag. That moment wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming peace. For months, she'd used rules and bylaws as weapons. But the truth was simpler. Sometimes authority doesn't wear a suit. It wears work boots and a hard hat. As the crew finished their checks and packed up, one of them clapped my shoulder. "Man, I wish I could have seen her face when you said that," he laughed. I smiled. "Yeah, but hopefully, that's the last time she'll underestimate who's maintaining her lights." That evening, as the sun set behind the ridge and the new line hummed quietly beneath the ground, I finally exhaled. The house, the tools, the steady rhythm of my work, all of it felt like mine again. And for the first time in months, the neighborhood was quiet. When I looked out across the street, I saw Karen's blinds twitch. Maybe curiosity, maybe embarrassment. Either way, she didn't come out. She didn't have to. She knew now exactly who kept her water running, her power steady, and her rules in check. Peace had finally returned to Lakeside Estates, and all it took was a reminder that not every man with a wrench is just another homeowner. Some of us keep the lights on for everyone, even the ones who make it hardest to shine. The next morning, I half expected another confrontation, a letter taped to my door, maybe a citation from the HOA, or at least another passive-aggressive email with a subject line community standards violation. But when I opened the door, there was nothing. Just the quiet hum of sprinklers down the street and the faint scent of cut grass. For the first time in months, no one was watching my driveway. No one pacing with a clipboard. No suspicious cars slowing down to snap photos. Karen's house, the one with the perfectly symmetrical flower beds, was unusually still. Curtains drawn. Driveway empty. It was as if the entire HOA hive had gone into retreat. I poured a cup of coffee and stepped outside. The morning light caught the side of my utility truck, still parked by the curb. The bold lettering Western Infrastructure Services felt like a silent shield now. I didn't need to say anything more. The message was already clear. I wasn't just another resident. I was the one who made this neighborhood function, whether Karen liked it or not. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed with an email. Subject: Apology HOA misunderstanding. I almost laughed. It was from the HOA's vice president, a man named Greg who'd always followed Karen's lead. The email was short, polite, and full of legal-sounding phrases about unfortunate miscommunication and appreciation for community service. Not a single word about Karen by name, of course, but between the lines, it was obvious. She'd been told to stand down. Still, I decided to take the high road. I replied simply, "No hard feelings. Happy to assist the community whenever needed." It wasn't sarcasm, it was strategy. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is show restraint when everyone expects retaliation. And that was true. The whole situation had started because Karen believed control meant authority. She didn't understand that real authority isn't about rules, it's about responsibility. You don't gain respect by barking orders. You earn it by quietly keeping things running while others sleep soundly, never worrying about the lights flickering or the pipes freezing. That night, I sat out on the porch with a beer, watching the porch lights flicker on one by one down the street. Every bulb powered by the same lines I'd helped lay. Every home connected by the same system I'd maintained for 2 decades. It struck me then control isn't about who has the rules. It's about who understands the systems beneath them. Karen had the bylaws. I had the blueprints. And in this neighborhood, that made all the difference. As the crickets started up and the air cooled, I realized something even more important. This wasn't just about putting an HOA president in her place. It was about reclaiming peace in my own life. About drawing a line between what others try to dictate and what you've earned through sweat and time. Sometimes victory doesn't look like a confrontation. Sometimes it looks like a quiet evening, a working water line, and the sound of nothing but your own heartbeat under a calm, starry sky. That was the night I finally stopped seeing Karen as a villain. She was just another person trying to control a world that wouldn't bend her way. But me? I didn't need control anymore. I had clarity, and in a neighborhood built on rules and appearances, that was the rarest kind of power. A few months passed, and the incident with Karen became more of a story whispered at block parties than a source of tension. New residents would move in, Hear snippets about that time the HOA messed with the wrong guy, and I'd just smile, wave it off, and go back to tightening a valve or checking a junction box. Peace had settled over lakeside estates, but it wasn't the fragile, rule-bound peace Karen once enforced. It was quieter, more natural, built on mutual respect instead of fear of fines. And every now and then, I'd catch her watching from across the street as I worked, her clipboard nowhere in sight. Maybe she finally understood something about the kind of people who actually keep things running. But if I'm being honest, the whole ordeal taught me something too. Something deeper than just neighborhood politics. It reminded me that most conflicts in life aren't really about the surface issue. They're about misunderstanding, about the lines people think they can cross, and the ones they don't even see buried beneath their feet. Karen had seen me as an obstacle, someone breaking rules. What she didn't realize was that the very systems she depended on, the ones that gave her the comfort of a lit home and a manicured lawn, were quietly managed by people like me. People who don't make the rules, but keep the world from falling apart when the pipes burst or the transformers fail. I started thinking about my father again, how he used to say, the strongest things in life are buried. Roots, foundations, and water lines. I used to think he was talking about infrastructure. But standing there, looking at that peaceful street, I realized he meant something else entirely. The things that hold us together aren't loud. They don't argue or demand recognition. They just do their job steady, unseen, and necessary. That's what the utility line meant to me now. Not just a pipe under concrete, but a symbol of patience, of endurance, of knowing your worth even when others don't see it. A few weeks later, I got a call from Greg, the same HOA vice president who'd once backed every one of Karen's complaints. "David," he said, "we've been talking at the board meetings. We realized we could use someone with your expertise. Would you be willing to consult for the HOA on future infrastructure concerns?" Paid position, of course. I laughed softly. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Sure," I said, "as long as you understand one thing, I don't play politics. I fix what's broken." He chuckled. "That's exactly why we want you." I didn't want revenge anymore. What I wanted was harmony. And oddly enough, that's exactly what I got. The HOA still held its monthly meetings, still handed out flyers about recycling days and parking restrictions, but now, when something broke, they didn't call a contractor. They called me. One evening, while inspecting a water meter on the far side of the neighborhood, Karen approached quietly. I looked up from the meter. "Didn't seem necessary," I replied. For the first time, her voice carried no authority, no edge, just honesty. "Apology accepted," I said, offering a small smile. "We all learn eventually." And in that brief exchange, something shifted permanently. Not power, not pride, just understanding. When I walked back home that night, the sunset reflected off the calm surface of the lake, the same water that flowed through the pipes beneath our feet. It struck me again, everything in life, from neighborhoods to people, only works when the flow stays balanced. Too much control, and it bursts. Too little, and it runs dry. I guess that's the real lesson beneath the concrete. Sometimes, the people who seem to have no power are the ones holding the whole system together. You just don't notice them until someone tries to cut the line. It's been almost a year since the day Karen tried to have my water line cut, and, in that time, the neighborhood has changed in ways I never expected. The lawns still gleam under the morning sun, the kids still race their bikes down the hill after school, and the HOA still mails out those neatly folded newsletters, but the tone of everything feels different now. There's less tension in the air. Fewer anonymous complaint slips tucked under doors. Fewer whispers about who's violating what rule. Instead, there's a quiet respect, a recognition that community isn't built on control, but on contribution. I never asked to be the symbol of that change. I just wanted to fix a broken pipe. But sometimes, one small act of standing your ground can shift the entire current of a place. One evening, in early autumn, I was out checking a pressure valve near the cul-de-sac when a young couple walked up. They'd just bought the old Grant house 2 doors down. The man extended a hand and said, "Hey, you're the guy who helped sort out that HOA mess, right? Everyone told us, we're lucky you live here." I laughed. Lucky is one word for it. Persistent might be better. They grinned and walked off, and I stood there for a moment, feeling that subtle pride you only get when you realize your actions quiet, unglamorous, steady actually made life a little easier for the people around you. Later that night, I sat out on my porch, watching the glow of streetlights reflect on the calm water of the lake. My father's old words came back again. Take care of the land, the lines, and the people, and they'll take care of you. He used to say that whenever we worked side by side in the field, tightening bolts under the hot sun, back then, I thought it was just about maintenance. Now I understood it was about legacy. In a strange way, Karen helped me see that. Her challenge forced me to step into who I really was, not just a man fixing pipes, but a keeper of the systems that make life work. Without her push, I might have stayed silent, content to do my job and let others make the noise. But sometimes the people who challenge you most end up shaping you in ways they never intended. A few weeks ago, I got invited to the annual HOA community dinner, a small gesture of goodwill. To everyone's surprise, I went. Greg handed me a small plaque during the event. It read, "In appreciation for outstanding service to the Lakeside Estates community." There was polite applause. Karen sat 2 seats away, quiet but smiling, not the forced smile of someone pretending to win, but the genuine one of someone who'd learned how to coexist. Afterward, as people drifted home, she approached me once more. "I guess you're part of the foundation here now," she said. "Funny thing about foundations," I replied. "They were always there. You just notice them when things start to crack." She nodded thoughtfully. "I'll remember that." As I walked home under the amber glow of the streetlights, I thought about how far things had come. The trench that once divided us was long filled and sealed, but in a way, it had connected more than it had ever separated. The water ran clean. The lights stayed on. The neighbors finally waved at one another without suspicion. That night, standing in the same driveway where the conflict began, I realized something simple and profound. Control fades, but contribution lasts. The systems we build, the respect we earn, the lessons we pass down, they all keep flowing, long after we've stopped fighting to be seen. And as the hum of the city lines beneath my feet vibrated softly through the ground, I smiled, knowing that even the quietest work leaves a lasting current. Because in the end, the true measure of a person isn't how loud they speak in meetings, it's how deeply their work runs beneath the surface, keeping everything alive long after the noise has faded.